What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Thursday edition of the Phillip Jordan Show. I am your host, Phillip Jordan, for Last Word on College Football, 96.9 The Legend in Dothan, Alabama, where I'm the in-studio host and producer of Dothan Woods Football. Hope everybody's having a great start to your Thursday or whenever you are listening to the show. We've got a good show planned for you guys today. Of course, it's Thursday. Of course, once a week here on the show, we will dive deep into the NFL, a division, a topic, a story, or a team. And today, we're going to dive deep into the New Orleans Saints. I'll be joined in just a few moments by Maddy Hudak. She covers the New Orleans Saints for 104.5 ESPN and also Saints Wire. You also check her out. She is the sideline reporter for Tulane football as well. So we are going to jump into the New Orleans Saints. We'll talk about the change with, Sean Payton and Drew Brees now gone from the organization. We'll jump into Jameis, Winston, the wide receivers, Michael Thomas. We'll jump to the defense. We'll jump into reasonable expectations. Just like we do with the college football previews, we'll do that with Maddy in just a few moments. And then after that, we're going to get to a user-submitted topic to discuss here on the show as well. So some good stuff here on the Thursday edition of the Phillip Jordan Show. But before we do all that, let you guys know you can find me in the podcast. You can find me on social media at PJordanSEC. Podcast is available on all your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. If you're on Apple Podcasts, please follow, rate, and review. Leave a review. I will read it on a future edition of the show. You can check it out over on YouTube at the Phillip Jordan Sports YouTube channel. Just go to the channel, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell for all notifications whenever there's a new video, and also leave a comment on a podcast episode. I will read those on a future edition as well. You can always email me at sports.philipjordan@gmail.com. Now let's jump into it with today's featured guest, Maddy Hudak, covering the New Orleans Saints. Everybody joining me on the show today, we're previewing the New Orleans Saints, and joining me is Maddy Hudak. You can check her out over on ESPN 104.5 and on Saints Wire, covering the Saints. Also, sideline reporter for Tulane football. So, football season, you can catch her if it's New Orleans related, football related. There you go. You got Maddy there. But Maddy, I appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It has been a very busy month of August indeed between the two.
Yeah, I'm sure. So, how's that work? You just jump between the two, or?
Yeah, Tulane starts at 7:30 and Saints start at 9. So it's been a long time outside in Louisiana, but I think I finally assimilated just in time for it to be over. So,
yeah, we are getting close. Week 0 in college football this weekend, and the NFL's getting closer and closer.
What is week 0 exactly?
They do it in high school football too, because I do high school football broadcasts here on the radio, and then we did week 0 this past Friday night. I'm like, why don't we just call it week 1?
Right. Does not make any sense to me. Like, does their season end earlier? Do they have 2 bye weeks? I don't get how they kick off on different weeks, but that's a problem.
And what even makes it weirder is some teams played legit games, and then some teams played preseason games / jamborees on week 0. So, yeah.
Okay, that's way too much to unpack, honestly.
And for a guy that one of his roles in the studio on Friday nights is to do a scoreboard update, trying to decipher which is a real game and which is it doesn't count. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. So they didn't have me in mind when they did that. But anyways, it's good the football season is here. That's the most important part. So the Saints, it's obviously a year in transition. It's been a year since Drew Brees has retired, and then now Sean Payton is gone. So just, around the city, the Saints fans there in New Orleans, what's the vibe? What's the energy with, obviously this is going to be a year of change. It's going to be a little bit different than what it used to.
Well, I would say that the change kind of started when Drew Brees retired. And then, yeah, you're right. Like, they've been in a state of flux for the last 2 seasons. But what was really interesting to me last year was, even though things didn't really go well for the Saints, it really seemed like not that much had changed despite losing such a presence like Drew Brees. Like, I had never covered training camp before last year, so I don't necessarily have a comparison. But the fact to me that it wasn't glaringly obvious just like really said a lot about the culture and what they've been able to build there. And in that same way, I feel like people might not all know that Dennis Allen was on the original coaching staff that Sean Payton put together after Hurricane Katrina. So he was down here in 2006. And I feel like that is kind of undervalued in his connection to the city in that aspect. But really, I mean, he turned the Saints defense from something that was a perennial, source of woes and jokes, at least for me growing up, to what I think is probably the strongest defense I've seen since I've been a fan of football. And they've really leaned into that identity, but they've also brought in guys like Tyrann Mathieu and Jarvis Landry, who are from New Orleans. And so as much as there's been things that are that are different, so much still feels the same in business as usual. And I think that they've really put the right pieces in for that to continue on.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember there was actually, I think, a couple of years. It was a few years after the Super Bowl. There was years saying, well, if they ever get a defense, it was one of them deals. It was Drew Brees is putting up all these numbers, but the defense just is not helping them out. And then it flipped around, and then the defense was good. And then we saw, I'll give my opinion. Drew Brees kind of dipped a little bit. You saw that into his career. I said, it's just bad timing. It's just bad luck for them and everything. But looking at this team, just, coming out of the preseason game this past week, they played the Green Bay Packers. I know a lot of backups were playing in this one, but who stood out to you the most? Who you think made a good name for themselves kind of to make the roster?
So we've all been kind of talking about the enigma of Kirk Merritt, if you will. He kind of was this smaller guy that had really strong showings at camp when he was playing wide receiver. And then he has recently been converted to a running back the last 2 days and has actually been a decent running back. Like, he has really good footwork. He's involved in the passing game, and it seems like they're really trying to carve out a role for him in a way that it doesn't just feel like they're like, sometimes I feel like that can be a dismissive feeling when they just convert them to another position, but the Saints do that often, especially with skill players on offense. And so that is an interesting thing for us to especially see play out this week. It stood out in a bad way. I unfortunately say Ian Book. Like, I don't really know what happened with him, because like, I don't want to harp on the guy, but it seems like he seems to have mentally regressed in a way that's almost inexplicable. And I'm like a big sports psychology person, and I just feel like the effects of that game last year, it might be the best like single game case of how much psychological damage like seeing ghosts at quarterback can do for someone. But it's just kind of hard at this point to see a place for him on the roster, given that they have this weird hack in Taysom Hill as like an actual emergency quarterback. It's no longer a joke with Alvin Kamara, who says he was the emergency quarterback. And that might be something I want to see for one snap. But I was saying earlier, like, he could be someone that I think would do really well working on like with the trainer this offseason, for example. But he did throw a really good touchdown pass to Chris Olave, which I guess, he stood out because I almost forget that he's a rookie because he seems so already integral to the Saints offense. Michael Thomas has been out with a hamstring injury. It has been kind of said it's not that serious. And I mean, honestly, when you're out of the game for 2 years, you would kind of almost expect eventually a soft tissue injury from starting and stopping again in a way you just haven't in the last couple of years. But it's almost like, not like an oh well thing, but okay, well, there's Jarvis Landry now, and Chris Olave and Jameis Winston is starting to kind of come back on after he's been hurt for a couple weeks. So for everything that went wrong in the offense last year, it seems like everything at this point is going right in an overwhelming way.
Yeah, and you bring up, and you just hit on my next thing I was going to ask about was the receiver, Michael Thompson. Really, he's missed 26 games over the last 2 years, only played 7 in 2020, didn't play at all last year. It is the feeling, though, that he will be back, he will be ready to go when the season starts, or could this be a thing that lingers into the season?
It's a hamstring. So I as someone who has had long-standing hamstring issues when I played sports, I always am a huge defender of players that have an off year when they have an issue with the hamstring. Like Marshawn Lattimore's sophomore season slump, he had a hamstring issue, and I kept pointing to that as, especially when you're a defensive back and it's all about that first step, but the same goes for the wide receiver. That all being said, you would never know that he was out of the game for 2 years before he recently had that hamstring problem. I was actually quite astonished because, again, I say I have hamstring issues, but an ankle injury is what took me out of soccer. And when you can't play on an ankle for 2 years, that's like really worrisome at a certain point. Mm-hmm. So I really was just worried about the like structural integrity of his ankle, for lack of a better term. But it's like he has not missed a day. We all were talking about Paulson Adebo, the cornerback, as kind of the camp darling the first couple of weeks. And Michael Thomas's first day in one-on-one drills, he went 3-0 on him. And it's just like, you can't guard him, but you now can't triple cover him either because there's plenty of other options on the Saints receiving corps. And that's really been, they had Michael Thomas those last couple of seasons, but who really past him was the definitive wide receiver too? I would say Emmanuel Sanders was the strongest one, and he was only on the team for one season. I thought the Saints really should have gone harder from him the year before that, but he seems to be poised to make a return this year, even if it's not in week 1. But at this point, I don't have any reason to not believe that unless they tell us. But whatever he comes back, he certainly has a, supporting cast that can handle it without him, but we'll be really happy to see him back.
So let's talk about the quarterback and Jameis Winston. And I feel like sometimes there's a little jokes that get thrown at him because people always think about Tampa Bay Jameis, with Bruce Arians just throwing all over the place, the interception, the 30 and 30 club that he was in. But last year he played really well before he got hurt. They were 5-2 in those games. He threw 14 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, 59% completion percentage, almost 1,200 parts. I mean, he was having a career year. With him. And so what have you seen from him coming back? I know he's been injured too as well. He missed a little bit of time, but kind of continuing that momentum from what he had last year before he got hurt and bring it into this season.
I think he has a sense of poise that we didn't see last year. And in training camp last year, there was just no poise because the quarterback competition it needed to go to the preseason. The training camp at that point really hadn't illuminated anything. And so just to see him have a sense of command immediately when he returns, but just to also go back to that kind of perception of Jameis Winston, I feel like people don't also think about the fact that your brain isn't fully developed until you're 25 years old. And so when you're talking about decision-making, when they're right out of college, when they're 23, that to me is very different than what I think is a much more mature Jameis Winston in a lot of different ways. And I personally don't think that you can make really, really bad decisions in life and then make really, really good decisions in football kind of thing. Not insinuating anything there, but I just feel like decision-making is kind of like a broader personality trait, if that makes sense. And I feel like he really just seems so much older and much of a leader. I think that he did I respected that he basically took I can't think of a single other former first round wasn't he the number 1 overall draft pick that's willing to basically, I think he was to Tampa, basically willing to sit third on the bench and learn behind Drew Brees for, $1 million salary. That was the first thing that stuck out to me as a sign of his elevated maturity. And then we kind of joke about the LASIK, but it seems to have sincerely made a difference with that. And it makes sense, right? It's your vision. But today it was the first day he's really been back in team drills since he hurt his foot, and he didn't have anything on his foot. And he went 5 for 5 in the hurry up drill and was really poised. There was 40 seconds on the clock in their situational football, no timeouts. He was 9 of 10 today, threw several, I think 1 or 2 touchdowns. And he actually took off running twice, which surprised all of us, including Dennis Allen. And that's something that also I thought was very underrated last year. Was it might have been a survivalist tactic at a certain point when the O-line was really not meshing at certain times. But I'm someone that third down conversions are really important to me in terms of evaluating a quarterback. And he wasn't able to make it happen with the supporting cast, as I feel like that's not even the correct term for what he was given last year. But he knew when to take off. He was decisive in doing so. And I thought that he showed a lot of potential that you're kind of starting to see come together. And I've said this, but you get the sense that the team kind of wants to fight for Winston because, as you said, they watched him fight on the field last year. So it is nice to kind of get him back. I thought Andy Dalton performed really, really well as a backup, and that's a luxury to have at this point. But you can definitely see the higher ceiling with Winston.
Yeah, that's got to be a good thing. If you do have a setback, you have an injury, you've got Andy Dalton sitting there. It's not like last year. No disrespect to Ian Book and Trevor Siemian. But that's not. I mean, it's a drop off, but it's not as much of one. You've got a guy in Andy Dalton that's won games. I mean, I know
Playoff
he gets
games.
A lot of. Yeah, I mean, they should have won one if Burfict, which that was AJ McCarron. I mean, that year that he got hurt, he was an MVP level quarterback. And I think a lot of people forget that, or what Andy Dalton has been. So having a guy like that on your bench is a huge luxury.
Yeah, I feel like what everyone kind of thought the consistency, because last year, you could not honestly discuss quarterbacks without having one fan base hate you for one reason or another. And so it gets turned into a Taysom versus Trevor Siemian thing, which really is why are we even doing this? Because neither of them would be in this position if Jameis Winston hadn't gone down in a freak horse collar accident like 2 weeks ago. But like Andy Dalton, to me, is just the perfect example of an executor backup who can come in and run Pete Carmichael's system of intermediate short passes that get the ball out quick, that move the ball downfield. We're not asking anything, overly exciting from him, but there's also not that floor drop off that I feel like you get with a lot of other quarterbacks, especially when it's oftentimes in-game relief, which honestly, credit to Trevor Siemian. I like joked he's like in-game relief king because those 2 games he came in last year, he lit it up. But Dalton is someone that if Winston were to go down for 1 or 2 weeks, it would feel okay. And that to me also with Michael Thomas, he has like that would be important for him to be there as well, as I think his most underrated asset is how much stability he gives to the backup quarterbacks. And I also thought that was a huge component that was missing last year.
You mentioned offensive line. Of course, they are having to replace left tackle Terron Armstead. What's that looking like? I know they've got rookie coming in, Trevor Penning from Northern Iowa. What's that looking like with them at left tackle?
So it was kind of more of a battle between him and the kind of longer time backup James Hurst, who was kind of dominating first team reps for a while, and then in Green Bay it was one day all the left tackles went down like flies, and Penning managed to come back, but James Hurst is still out. And so he has seen, I think a lot more time, but there was all these talks about, all the fights he was getting into at the start of camp, but to his credit, there has not been one for the last 2 weeks at this point. And he today, like, I think we've all kind of realized how much we, can't take for granted having such like a good, not just coaching staff, but like competition on both sides of the ball in a way that there wasn't last year. So you couldn't really evaluate the wide receiving corps or the defensive back corps until the season started, because you just really couldn't tell, is it this one, that one, or are they both kind of an issue? But like today, he won 9 out of 10 pass protection reps, and 3 of those were on Marcus Davenport, and 5 were on Peyton Turner. And those are first-round draft picks for the Saints. And if health permitted, would be really strong players. I still think they are. It's just they can't stay on the field for more than 3 games at a time. But to see him kind of winning against those guys, with especially like Peyton Turner and Davenport for that matter, because he got kind of beat on speed in that Texans game, but they're big, but they're also quick. And so for him to kind of have held up against them, you get like an actually good barometer of how he can hold up against what would be, a starting lineup on another team.
So I want to transition to Tom Brady's favorite part of the Saints, and that's their defense. I have to get it in. The one team that gave him trouble the last 2 years. But that's a question I have for you. But this defense is stacked. And look, I told you off air, we were more focused on the offense. I'm telling the audience, we did focus more on offense because, what are you going to say about the defense? They're going to be really good. You got Cameron Jordan and Marcus Davenport up front. Good luck. Have fun quarterbacks with that. That's a lot of fun. Linebacker Demario Davis, Pete Werner's there. You got Marshall Lattimore in secondary, and then they added secondary with Marcus May and then Tyrann Mathieu. That may have been a weakness. They may have fixed that. The safety positions should be locked down and pretty solid. Just if you're going to attack this defense, how do you do it? Because they've got stars at every level, and it's going to be difficult, I think, for offenses.
They do. And the only place I would say they have any weakness is the defensive line, as much as they are touted, because fact of the matter is, Peyton Turner only played 5 games last year, and I don't think Marcus Davenport played very many past him. And they kind of lost a lot of depth at defensive tackle the season prior to that. And David Onyemata was, out for the first 6 games last year. So that was kind of a mess, but it didn't really seem like there was a strong counterpart opposite him either. Tano Passignon, I would say, but he also got hurt last year. So that line, to me, if it's not the starters out there, then we kind of have seen, like we saw like Taylor Heineke last year running around. Daniel Jones had like a great rushing game against them. So it can be hit or miss on them depending on who's out there, except if it's Tom Brady. I don't know what lanes they have on him, but it's like, I honestly respect Tom Brady. He's from my hometown, and like I get like the chip on his shoulder mentality, but it's objectively hilarious that like the Saints just have his card. And then Cam Jordan says, I'm going to sack him 5 times. It's like, okay, I believe him because he's about to do that. But a lot of the players that you just mentioned are unfortunately hurt. And so that's really my only caveat with this team. Like Pete Werner, I have been really high on him and continue to be that, but he has been out of camp the last couple of weeks with a groin injury. I thought Chase Hansen really stepped in and performed really well in these last 2 preseason games. I think I saw the play where he got really rolled under a tackle and then was out of that game, and we haven't seen him. So that's just the only. And then Marshawn Lattimore hurt his hamstring at the beginning of camp. We haven't really seen him at all. But to your point about that secondary, you wouldn't even really care at this point, because I agree that as much as we touted, Marcus Williams and his kind of elite range that he had at free safety and what Malcolm Jenkins could really do all over the place, fact of the matter is, I understand why Dennis Allen said, I kind of want interchangeable safeties back there with complementary skill sets who can defend the box, who can kind of go back into free, and who can do split safety coverage. And he didn't really realize how valuable that was until seeing how fascinating it is with Chris Richard back there, who I think also deserves a lot of credit for that, because safety was a weak point after the draft. And we all figured they might sign Tyrann Mathieu, but what if they don't? And that still doesn't solve the other counterpart. And I always say that the NFL continues to amaze me in how they've just defied science at this point, because Marcus May tore his Achilles in December, and you wouldn't have even remembered at this point. So we weren't sure if he was going to even be at training camp or the start of the season, because usually that's a 10-month recovery. So that's been like a healthy luck thing for the Saints, but to kind of have no clue what that was going to look like, to almost be like, well, who's fifth on the depth chart, has really been fascinating. And I think they can kind of compensate for a lot of those injury weaknesses. It's just the pass rush really, to me, has to stay with at least 3 or 4 of their starters in that rotation on a healthy basis.
Yeah, it amazes me how players come back the way they do. Because I remember if you
Taysom's Liz Frank should not be back.
Yeah, and an Achilles injury would knock a guy out for a year and a half. I mean, he would not be right. I mean, and you just see it in all sports. It's just amazing how these guys are now able just to bounce back as quickly as they are. And, real quickly, just from what you've seen, except obviously the playoff game with Tampa Bay. But what do they do that you've seen that gives Tom Brady fits?
Well, they can rush with 4, and they know how to collapse the interior really quickly. And Tom is very like Drew Brees, and that interior pressure is his worst friend. Mm-hmm. And I also I don't really care to defend the playoff game from a, any sense other than I just feel like if you look at it, Drew Brees had no business, being out there with how injured he was, but it is what it is. Neither did Michael Thomas, for that matter. Traquan Smith, I think, broke his wrist in the middle of the game. They lost Deontay Harris, Taysom Hill right before that. And then if Jared Cook hadn't fumbled in the last 2 minutes, they might have won that. And so I feel like all of that, in spite of, but just for some reason, they have figured out how to completely collapse their interior line in a way that I can't see them do as consistently with another team besides maybe Atlanta. But even Matt Ryan's able to get away from them sometimes. But all 4 regular season matchups that Tom Brady has played the Saints, he has yet to win one of them. And I would be, frankly, considering faking an illness if I was him with that week 2 lineup, given how many really bad injuries they've had to their offensive line too. So that just leaves them in a really vulnerable position. But when you can get pressure on him with 4, the Saints really only employ 2 linebackers. And so that's the rest of that is defensive backs who are all very skilled and just locked down. Mike Evans and Marshawn Lattimore, they're able to get to Chris Godwin. They had Antonio Brown with CJ Gardner-Johnson in the slot last year. So if they're able to really shut all of those facets down, it seems like it's simple, but yet, they're the only ones able to execute it time in and time out without fail and without, at this point, adjustment. It'll be curious to see if Todd Bowles can figure something out that Bruce Arians wasn't able to see.
Yeah, and for everybody out there who won't know, their first matchup is on September 19th in
week
18th in week 2. So Giselle may want to schedule another vacation for him and Tom. During that week. But so I talk about the schedule. They open with Atlanta. They're at Atlanta. They play Tampa Bay. But and I was looking at the schedule. For me, I see this. I see this team. I think if Jameis Winston can continue what he was doing last year before he got hurt, I think this team can win 10 games. And it's, especially when you look at where the NFC's at. But for you, when you look at this team, you look at what they have schedule-wise and just, the rest of the NFC. For you, what are reasonable expectations for New Orleans Saints?
Well, I always keep saying, they were 9-8 last year, and one, his at that point unprecedented collapse by the Los Angeles Rams away from stumbling into the playoffs with no kicker. And if you looked at 2 or 3 of those games, especially the 2 back-to-back 2-point losses to the Titans and then the Falcons, they missed extra points, both of them in the Titans game. And if you were anywhere further than the 35, you were really not thinking of kicking a field goal. And so I feel like that really went under the radar last year. But to me, 3 more games on top of that, given everything that went wrong last year, it just doesn't seem that unreasonable to me, given with, what strengths they've kind of gotten at so many positions at this point, in a way that even when they were healthy last year, they just didn't have the personnel. But I'm very worried about that week 14 bye, because to me, that's not a bye week. That's just the season is over at that point. It's the same thing as their week 5 bye week last year, which I also thought was ridiculously early. The Saints do never get a bye week. So I really think, and I know everyone says this, but I do think it is the number one factor in who wins the Super Bowl is the health of your team. And I think if the Saints at those position groups, especially like off both trenches, quite honestly, if they're able to remain healthy, then I see no reason that they, can't win 12 of those games.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's going to be interesting. And I mean, like I said, the NFC, if somebody's asking for that 4th spot, who is that 4th team, and why not them?
No one ever thinks it's the Saints. I really don't know why, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Well, they got the talent. And like I said, Jameis does what he did last year. I think they can do it, especially with that defense. But well, anyways, I have kept you a little bit longer than I said I would. But this has been fun talking Saints with you, talking all things Saints. Appreciate you taking the time, Maddy, coming on. If the listeners and viewers want to follow you online, where can they find you? Check out all the work you're doing.
Yeah, I post most of my stuff on Twitter, so that's usually the easiest hub, and I'm Maddy Hudak _94 on there. But I do write for USA Today Saints Wire, so you can usually find those articles, like I said, on my Twitter, but on our website as well. But this was fun. Thank you for having me on.
All right, anytime, and I hope we can do this again sometime down the road.
For sure. All right.
All right, once again, thanks to Maddy Hudak for coming on today's edition of the Phillip Jordan Show. And go check her out. Follow her coverage as New Orleans Saints, Tulane football as well. Go check her out and all the good stuff she does covering both college and pro football teams there in New Orleans. Now, as we get out of here, I will pull the curtain back. Pre-recorded this episode on Tuesday night, so that's why there's no news section here on today's podcast. But I will jump into one of your top of the questions you guys sent me in last week when I was going to do that mailbag episode. So here we go. So Destin Baker, what about discussing NIL? Which that's always a tough topic. I mean, there's just a lot of things got to go in there. Of course, there needs to be regulation on it, but that's a government thing, and in my opinion, they've got more important things to be dealing with right now than what's going on with college football. But a lot of people looked at NIL as this thing that said, "Oh wow, it's going to even the playing field. Teams that don't normally have a chance will now have a chance, and all that stuff." Well, no, the richer just gets richer because the big schools got the most money for a reason, and they're going to get the best players. We've seen what happened. For example, Jordan Addison going from Pitt to USC. That's only going to keep happening. I mean, you've heard Lane Kiffin talk about it. We just legalized cheating. There's no salary cap. I mean, that's basically what's going to be. You're going to have to put a cap on it, I think, to make things fair. If not, the Alabamas, the Georgias, and Ohio States of the world, the USCs in the future are going to dominate. And then, but also, I'm for the players getting money. I believe they should get it because what they do, the stuff they do to their bodies let's face it, for our entertainment. I mean, it's for them because they're trying to get to the next level of the National Football League. But still, they go through a lot. They put their bodies through a lot. And I believe they deserve the money that they get. And I believe you should be able to make money off your name. Just think about it. If you had, before all this, if you had a college player that wanted to start a podcast, they could do it. They could make money off of it. And I don't think that's right. I don't. You've seen situations where players have a YouTube channel. They can't monetize their own YouTube channel because that would be a violation. I mean, so I believe players should be able to benefit off their name, image, and likeness. But I tell you where something's going, I think it's going to go here eventually. And I think that is with all this money these conferences and these schools are getting from TV revenue, I think the players eventually are going to get a big piece of the pie. You look at the money the Big Ten is getting from Fox, CBS, and NBC coming up soon. You see, the money ESPN is going to be given to the SEC, the ACC, and the Big 12, and what's left of the Pac-12 is going to make some big time money too as well. So that's where it's going. You're going to see more and more of these athletes get paid, and there's going to be some people who's not going to like it, traditionalists. I get it. You want to have things stay. I want part of the traditions to stay. But college football's headed in a different direction. I've said this for probably a year now, and I really started to hammer it home after USC and UCLA decided to go to the Big Ten. College football is going to look more like the NFL, and that's good and bad in a bunch of different ways. And I'm kind of worried that the casual college football fans can go by the wayside because they're going to look at the product and say, well, this is just and college football fans, listen, do not take me as me taking a shot at college football when I say what I'm about to say. I do not mean it that way, but you got to admit what it is. The NFL is the top of the line. It's the best of the best. The casual fan may look at eventually down the road, not anytime soon, and look, that looks just like the NFL, but the NFL is the better product because it just has fully better players. What makes college football is that it's different, it's chaotic, it's beautiful, and all of that. And I'm not saying you won't lose any of the chaos, but if college football gets shrunk down to like 40, 50 teams, it won't be as good. You won't have a different variety because I think college football, when you watch the NFL, most offenses are run the same. It's all cookie cutter, really. Most of the stadiums are the same. Most of the offenses are the same. The fan experience can be bland. It's not like it is college. College is the tradition, the pageantry, the excitement, the just a pure passion from the fans. That's what makes it different. And the bad part of all this stuff that's happening in college football right now, that's what I'm worried about. College football will lose what makes it different. And if it loses that, I worry the diehards will be there. And especially here in the SEC where I'm at, they're going to go. I'm not worried about that. But the country as a whole and those casual fans that just occasionally, well, maybe not occasionally, they tune in for those really big matchups on Saturdays. They're not going to sit there and watch 11 a.m. to 2 or whenever the Pac-12 game ends. Not those fans. The diehards, they're still going to be there. But the casual fans may catch in on Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama, Auburn, Alabama, Texas A&M this year. Matchups like that, the big, sexy brand matchups, yes, but also tune in for the quirkiness that is college football. And I worry college football is losing that. It will lose that. And I think that's what's going to hurt the sport. I know I kind of went off of Destin's topic of NIL, but that's just kind of my thoughts. I think it all does tie in together. All right, guys, that's going to do it for the Thursday edition of the show. I plan on doing a Friday solo podcast, probably about 20-25 minutes. We got week 0 coming up. I have not even touched on any of them games, so we'll do that probably on Friday morning. I'll drop a 20 to 30 minute podcast for that, and I may have some podcast related news in that one too as well. Well, guys, remember you can follow me on social media at PJordanSEC. The podcast is available on all your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. If you're on Apple Podcasts, please follow, rate, and review. Leave me a review. I will read it on a future edition of the show. You can check out the show over on YouTube at the Phillip Jordan Sports YouTube channel. Just hit the subscribe button, hit the bell for all notifications, and leave a comment on the video. I'll read those on a future edition as well. You can always email me at sports.phillipjordan@gmail.com. Everybody has a great rest of your Thursday. Until Friday, bye-bye.